YouTube, in this deck profile, I'm going to be doing a deck profile on my Tachikaze Angerblader deck. So this is Angerblader for standard. It's a pretty straightforward deck. It's surprisingly not too pricey to build compared to some other decks that are very competitive right now. Like compared to Revengers, for example, this deck is like significantly cheaper to build. So let's get right into it. So for Angerblader, he's your main. I call him Dark Arm Dragon in Cardfight Vanguard. Those who play Yu-Gi-Oh know, who have played Yu-Gi-Oh for a while, probably know who Dark Arm Dragon is. Basically, he's Dark Arm Dragon. He gets rid of one of your cards, turns one of your rear guards into Gauge to destroy one card on the opponent's field, and you get to select the rear guard that you retire, that the opponent has to retire. So, very good skill. Then he also, when he attacks, you can counter +1 and stand 3 of your rear guards with 3 or more equipped gauges. If you build the deck correctly, you'll find out that that's actually pretty easy to pull off. And all the front row units get 5k. So in Excel, that's extremely good skill. That's why Tachikaze is basically what Shadow Paladins used to be a long time ago, sort of, in terms of their selective retire power that Shadow Paladin no longer has access to, which is quite surprising, but they tried to nerf that clan, but regardless, people still play Shadows like crazy. So anyway, backup grade 3 really depends on your grade 2 and grade 1 lineup. Now for me, this deck has a ton of rear guards that build Gauge automatically, so I don't need to run Optical, the rare that came with Angerblader. But if you want, you can run that card, or you can run like 2 Dark Rex and 2 of that other card. But I'm just running all Rex because he is pretty good as a Vanguard or rear guard. He can also be superior called from the drop zone, which is really nice. He's got like a Grand Blue effect. So running 4 of him, plus he's an old classic that's been remade, so I had to run him. He's really cool. His SPs were like dirt cheap. So anyway, 4 Dark Rex. He's surprisingly good with all the rear guards supported here that builds Gauge. Now for MVP, in terms of rear guards, definitely Clear Out Dragon, Sweeper. He's the sweeper. He literally is the sweeper. Basically, your opponent, if they can't kill him early, like as soon as you get 3 Gauge on this guy, things just start going downhill for your opponent from there. Like this is the main card. That's a big problem card. A lot of people have complained about this card, but I don't really see it going anywhere, mainly because there are ways to get around it. The one thing though is it cannot be chosen by your opponent's card abilities. So that means it can't be bound, it can't be retired, it can't, you know, like it gets around a lot of things. So it's just really, and it's really strong in late game. So anyway, he's one of the main engines of the deck that just basically makes you win time and time again. Him along with Angerblader. Next I'm running Mega Rex. Mega Rex actually it was not designed to work with the deck, but he works surprisingly well in here. He does have Vanguard or rear guard effect, which is nice. He retires another rear guard and draws a card when he attacks. And if he's on a rear guard circle, you can gain Gauge on him, and then he gets 5k for all the Gauge. Oh, that's a recurring thing. Equip Gauges for Tachikaze is a very nice mechanic. I like the mechanic. If you gain too much Gauge, though, in the late game, what ends up happening is you could run the risk of deck out. So this is something worth mentioning, because it has happened to me on a few occasions. Next, I'm running 4 Turbo Smilodon. Turbo is really important. If you don't have him, you gotta run the grade 3 that does the exact same thing that he does. Basically, when he's placed on VRR, or when he attacks a Vanguard, he gains a Gauge. Or you can put a Gauge from the top of your deck face down on any one of your rear guards. So it doesn't have to be him. So he's really good at helping you get, say, this guy to his 3 Gauge as soon as you can, so he can't get retired, and it'll be very hard for your opponent to run him over. They usually will end up just ignoring this card, and the only time that it'll ever leave the field is when they pressure the Vanguard, and you may have to end up intercepting with him occasionally. So that's like the only way it would ever happen. Anyway, for grade 1s, we run 4 Angry Roar Dragon, Roar Barrio. This guy, he's really nice in the early game as a rear guard. When he's placed, so +1, put Gauge, equip Gauge on something but it cannot be him though. It has to be another rear guard. So that's the one thing that you got to keep in mind. Then that unit will get 5k for every one of the gauges on it. So let's say he puts gauge on Turbo and Turbo already had one. Then that means that Turbo now has 2, and that means Turbo will gain 10k power because it's 5 for the gauge that he gave him, and then 5 for the one that was already on him. So very good. Next we run 4 Light Blade Dragon. This guy is actually surprisingly useful. Usually what ends up happening though with this card is that you'll rest it to give something gauge. Like on the turn you have Angerblader, you usually will call him somewhere in the back. You'll rest him, give something gauge so that it has the 3rd gauge or the 2nd gauge. Then you will use Angerblader to turn him into the 3rd gauge that unit will need so that it can restand. That's usually how I most commonly use this card. But you could also use him as a booster if needed, especially in the early game. And then I am running 4 Vicious Claw Dragon. Now I really like this guy. I don't see a lot of people running this, or even at like max copies. Usually someone will run like 2 or none. Sometimes 3, but I'm running the max copies because in the early game, gaining gauge as fast as you can is really good. And the nice thing about this is it interacts with Mega Rex because they're both from the same set. They're both like from EB01. When he gets retired, like either for say an opponent's retire effect or for Mega Rex retiring him, you can Soul Blast him, and you can take one of the gauges that were underneath him and add that to your hand. So that's really nice. I've used that a couple times. The most memorable one was the one time he had like a Perfect Guard underneath him, and I retired him and I got the Perfect Guard to my hand. That was pretty cool. So stuff like that allows you, like, this is a really good utility card in here. And then the last grade one I'm running is just 1 Sharp Tooth Dragon. It can fulfill a whole bunch of different roles. I might actually bump this up to 2. I'm not sure if I'm going to drop one of the blue guys or this guy for another one of these, but I might bump him up to 2 because he's a pretty good utility card in the mid to late game. Usually though, if you're having to rely on this, that means that either you opened up with Dark Rex as the main Vanguard and things aren't really going your way. That's why I don't really put too much reliance on this card. That's why I only own 1 copy of it. For the trigger lineup, it's very straightforward. It's 4 Archbird, 8 criticals, and 4 heals. You do not really need fronts in the deck, mainly because the only way I could recommend running fronts is if you wanted to split your PGs between, like, say 2 Archbirds and 2 grade 1 PGs, which it is possible to do that. Or you could even just go like 4 grade 1 PGs, then you could up this into like a mixture of criticals and fronts, and that would probably work as well. But honestly, in playtesting the deck multiple times, I don't really feel like the front triggers are that necessary in the Tachikaze. It's kind of like Narukami, where it doesn't really benefit a whole lot from front triggers the way a clan like Gold Paladin would. So that's the deck profile, guys. It's pretty quick. Hope you guys enjoyed the build, and let me know in the comments if you run Tachikaze and what you're looking forward to later this year when they get an update, and if you think they'll be relevant a year from now. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.